Happy Monday. Welcome back to Drinking by Myself. My name is Emma and today I am doing the read this instead of that video. So this was a video idea that I got from April from getting Hugo with it, so I will link to her original video below. I had already really wanted to do a video. I had like a vague idea in my head but I couldn't figure out the format, but I wanted to do something with the fact I kept reading these books that had really similar themes, if not like really similar plots. But one example would work a lot better for me than the other, and I wanted to do something with that idea, and then April uploaded this video that was like literally called read this instead of that or something like that, and I was like, there you go, she's nailed it. So that's what I'm gonna do. So I've kind of divided my list into two sections. There's the first section of books that are like actually weirdly similar, and then the second section is just books that have similar vibes but I prefer one over the other. So starting with the ones that are actually really similar. Instead of If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, you should read The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I just realised I should have collected these books so I could show you. 1 second. Okay, that took me forever to gather them. It turns out I wrote such a long list. I have so many books here. Hang on. Oh no. And now I'm out of breath because I tried to take a thumbnail holding all the books, but there's too many of them. Can we even remember what I was saying? Instead of reading If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which has been really popular on BookTube for God knows what reason, because it's terrible, you should read The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Please say I remembered to get The Secret History. I did. Here it is. So The Secret History is a divisive book. I will say that. Some people absolutely hate it. I originally read this one with a book club and I gave it 5 stars and everyone else in the book club gave it like 2 stars. So not everyone's going to like it. But really nobody should like If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I don't even have that book to show you because I would never own that book. Both of these books are set at universities. They are both about a very tight-knit group of students. In this case, it is a group of classics students. In If We Were Villains, it is a group of theatre, Shakespeare students. Both books have a completely insufferable cast of characters. They have that in common. Both books are very pretentious. However, the difference is this book was well written. Major difference there. Oh, and key thing, they are both murder mysteries. So in both cases, one of the group gets murdered, all of the rest of the group are suspicious, and you're figuring out what happened. If you don't like books about unlikable main characters, particularly like very pretentious, unlikable main characters, you will probably not like either of these books. I actually love unlikable main characters, so that wasn't my problem with If We Were Villains. My problem with that book is that not only were they unlikable, they didn't feel real to me in any way. They were a group of Shakespeare students who spoke to each other entirely in Shakespeare quotes all the time, but they're supposed to be a group of like uni students. Like, have fun. Stop talking Shakespeare to each other. That is just bizarre. Like, they felt so unrealistic and they felt boring. They felt like people I would never be friends with. Whereas these guys, I also would never be friends with, but I believed them as these like dark characters. I believed their descent beyond the boundaries of normal morality. I didn't believe it in If We Were Villains. So when they made certain decisions, it just seemed like really out of the blue for characters to suddenly act that immorally or like that stupidly. I don't know, I just didn't believe the decisions they were making. So if you're looking for like a dark academia, murder, mystery, pretentious book, this is the one for you. I absolutely love this book. Do not even touch me with If We Were Villains. God, if I talk this long about all the books, we're going to be here all night. The next one may also be controversial because I know everybody loves The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, but instead of reading The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, you should read If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura. So both books are about a world in which things start vanishing from the world and from people's memories of it. And I'm not here to criticize The Memory Police. I really like Yoko Ogawa as a writer. I think she writes beautifully. I've only read 2 of her books so far. I loved The Housekeeper and the Professor. I only quite liked The Memory Police. It just didn't quite work for me, but the writing is beautiful, so I'm not here to criticize it. I just had already read that similar premise in this book, and it worked a lot better for me here. So in this book, our main character makes a deal with the devil. So he finds out he has an illness and he's going to die, and he makes a deal with the devil where for every extra day that he can have of life, he has to sacrifice something from the world. So he sacrifices like chocolate from the world or telephones from the world, and they just vanish and they are no longer in people's memories. And it was even more similar than that. It was so interesting that in both this book and The Memory Police, the way things vanish is very interestingly told. Like, those things still kind of exist in the world. You might see one. It's just that nobody has any memory or association of what that thing is. So it's funny finding that in 2 books, because I would have thought that was a very like niche way of depicting things vanishing from the world. So the reason I would say to read this one instead of The Memory Police is The Memory Police was a very cool premise, it was beautiful writing, but I got to the end of the book and I wasn't sure what I was supposed to have taken from it. I didn't feel particularly moved in any way. Whereas this book felt like a much more kind of philosophical meditation on life and what is important to you, because each thing that our main character chooses to get rid of, we then explore the significance of that thing in our main character's life. Does he have a name? I don't remember him having a name. So they're both very strange, but this one like meant something to me. I don't have this next book with me because I read it on NetGalley, I believe, but instead of Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney, read, what's it called? If I Die Before I Wake by Emily Koch. So both of these books have a main character who is in a coma, who is trying to solve the mystery of how they got put in that coma. They are aware of the people around them, though nobody knows that they can hear them. So both, like, it's a pretty like claustrophobic, creepy premise that you're in this coma and you can't move and you can't speak, but you can hear everything that's going on around you. Very clever setting for a murder mystery. The book Sometimes I Lie has been much more famous, much more popular on BookTube, and I can't put my finger on why I didn't like it, because it has so many elements I should like, but it was just kind of shit. It was one of those thrillers where there are all these twists and turns which should be mind-blowing, but instead you're just like, okay. I do remember there was one particular reveal in Sometimes I Lie that was very, very clever. One of those like proper twists where what you think you've been reading isn't what you've actually been reading. That was pulled off very well. But in terms of the ups and downs of the plot, it was all over the place. If I Die Before I Wake, on the other hand, is a much slower moving book. It's got more emotion and heart to it. It's less about the twists and turns and the mystery and solving the mystery, and more about our narrator, who is a man called Alex. It's more about his emotions, really. It's also about the emotions of his family, who are trying to decide whether or not to take him off life support. So it just felt like a much more fleshed out, interesting, nuanced book that also had an element of suspense and mystery. And then I have 2 more books in this weirdly similar category, but they're not really weirdly similar because they're like very deliberate retellings. But anyway, instead of reading The Readers of Broken Wheel Recommend by, can't even remember who, you should read Fried Cream Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. So the book The Readers of Broken Wheel Recommend, it is a present day novel about a woman who moves to this small town and starts working in the bookshop. It sounds delightful. She starts working in the bookshop and she like starts reigniting a love for reading in the people of this town. And from the premise, I thought I was going to absolutely adore it, but it wasn't really enough about the books at all. Like it didn't feel like it encapsulated a love for reading in it. Instead, I was just kind of uninterested in it. But the whole way through, I kept being like, these characters are literally straight out of Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe, which was deliberate. She was inspired by it, but just skip it and go and read the original instead. Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe is set in that's a good question. It's set between the 80s and the earlier teas. It's the 20s, I looked it up. So we have present day, which is the 1980s, where we meet this woman called Ninny in a nursing home telling stories of her youth in the 20s in this really small town called Whistle Stop and the various characters who lived there. So it's this very much like this ensemble cast living in this quirky, eccentric town. Whistle Stop Cafe is like the heart of the novel, and you even get recipes in the book. Like, it's just really wholesome and delightful. But there's also a lot of depth and darkness in it. So you explore racism, you explore homophobia, you explore abuse, you explore murder, you explore possible cannibalism, if I remember correctly. It's just a fascinating book that is ultimately so uplifting, and you should 100% read it. I need to read it again. And then on a similar note to that, instead of reading Genuine Fraud by E. Lockhart, just skip again straight to the original and read The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. So Genuine Fraud is a very clever idea. It tells the story of The Talented Mr. Ripley. It's gender swapped, so our main character is a young woman, which I loved. It is a very feminist book, and I thought that worked really well. it is also pretty clever because it's told backwards. So every chapter takes place before the one you just read. So you're learning this story in reverse and discovering more about like the lies that are going on the further back into the past you go. So all of that was very cool, but it is literally the story of the talented Mr. Ripley, like scene by scene by scene. So there was nothing surprising in it at all if you already know this story, whether you've read the book or seen the movie. And so because of that, I just found myself getting bored because I was like, every twist that's coming I know is going to come. And I would have thought that if she was retelling the story in this way, that she would like slightly change it so that even if you're really familiar with the book, it feels brand new. Because surely the book is like aimed at people who love the original. Usually when you retell something, it's like for fans of the original, and therefore you need to give them something to make it new, and there just wasn't really. So while it was cool and it was fun and it was feminist, I think the original is a brilliant book. If you don't know what either of them are about, let me tell you. Tom Ripley, the talented Mr. Ripley, is this creepy dude who is very good at impersonations. And so, how does this start? He, at one point, lies about what university he went to. And it turns out the guy he's talking to, that guy's son went to that university and has moved off to Italy and, like, won't come home. So this old guy he's talking to is like, you must know my son Dickie if you went to school together. Why don't you go out and try and persuade him to come home? So Tom lies and goes along with it. It's like, oh yeah, I know Dickie. Flies out to Italy, impersonates someone that Dickie is supposed to have known, and he just gets like further and further into this web of lies, and of course it gets darker and turns into like a series of murders, a series of crimes, and at every stage Tom Ripley can impersonate a new person, and it's just kind of ridiculous and fun. So the title, The Talented Mr. Ripley, is kind of sarcastic in a way. Like, he is talented at impersonations, but he also just like gets so lucky. He should not get away with half the shit he gets away with. So it's a lot of fun, and the movie is also brilliant. I really recommend it. Okay, now on to books that just have like similar vibes to each other. Instead of reading Three Women by Lisa Taddeo, even though I actually loved that book, and you should read it too, even better, you should read Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. So this one doesn't really fit with my instead of this, read that, because I genuinely gave them both 5 stars. It's just that this was a better 5 stars. They're actually pretty different books. Three Women is non-fiction. It's a non-fiction story about 3 women and their lives, and they don't interconnect in any way other than that all the stories, strands, explore these women and their sense of sexuality, I guess. So it's an exploration of female desire. Girl, Woman, Other is a fiction book about 12 different people, mostly women, and they do have interconnecting lives. So like, not really the same thing, but I read this one afterwards and it definitely gave me Three Women vibes in that it was about exploring the inner lives of these women. And Three Women, despite being non-fiction, entirely reads like it's fiction. I, as you know, am not very good at reading non-fiction, and I would like, if you hadn't told me, I wouldn't even have realised that Three Women was non-fiction because it's just told like a story. So in that sense, these 2 books did feel quite similar. It's just a series of exploring women's inner emotional lives. I loved them both, but this one is the best. Instead of reading The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which everyone and their mother has read and keeps saying how good it is, and it just isn't that good, you should read The Psychology of Time Travel by Kate Mascarenhas. This book, excellent premise. I've read it twice because the premise sounds so good that the first time I didn't enjoy it, I was like, I must have been wrong, it must have been good, so I read it again and still didn't like it. The premise is a guy has to solve a murder. He wakes up one day in this very grand house in a body he doesn't recognise and lives through a day in which a woman dies at the end. And the next day, he wakes up, lives that same day again, but in a different body of one of the other guests at the house. And he has 7 days and 7 different bodies to live in to try and solve this murder from all angles. Should have been great, but it was so overly confusing and complicated that you get to the point where you're like, I don't even care about keeping track of this anymore, I'm done. This, on the other hand, The Psychology of Time Travel, this is also a murder mystery that also involves time travel, but this time like the more traditional sense of time travel, I guess. But you need to put together all the pieces from all the different timelines in order to figure it out. So it's still complicated, it still requires you to keep track of stuff, but it's like actually manageable. You actually can keep track of it. Plus it's just fun, and you have a lot of women as the main characters. There's a lot of queer romances, which I loved. This book had a few things that people found offensive, like quite fat-phobic descriptions of people's bodies and stuff, whereas this one is just like genuinely fun and queer and feminist and progressive, and this is the way to go. Another one where I actually like the book I'm telling you not to read, you should read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, because it is wonderful and I gave it 5 stars. But if you don't want to, for whatever reason, you have your heart set against it because you are judgy or something, I do have 2 alternative options for you. The Confession by Jessie Burton and The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. So, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is set in like the golden age of Hollywood. It's about this woman who was a movie star called Evelyn Hugo. She had 7 husbands. Her real love of her life was a woman, but she's bisexual, so she does have romances with some of the husbands. Not all of them were real love stories. And as well as getting this flashback into her past in Hollywood, you also meet her in present day as this very reclusive, aging actress who never gives interviews but has now finally decided to tell the story of her life. So, 2 very similar books here. The Confession is set between present day, when we meet this reclusive, famous author, and we flash back to her past when one of her books was being adapted into a movie, and so she moved from England over to Hollywood with her girlfriend, and so we get the Hollywood glamour, we get the female-female love story, we get the 2 parallel timelines, but this is just a more literary version, I guess, if you're feeling snobby. Similarly, The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield, we have, again, a reclusive, famous author who has never... She has given interviews, but she's always lied in them, so no one knows what's the true story. And out of the blue, she contacts this particular young writer to come and write her life story. And the young writer has no idea why she's been chosen, which, by the way, also happens in 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. She chooses this particular journalist to write her story, and the journalist is like, wow, why me? This one is also told between 2 timelines, but the flashbacks are not to Hollywood this time. They are to this kind of creepy, ghostly old house. So the author in this, who is called Vida Winter, she is telling this story about these creepy twins living at this house, and it is unclear exactly what the connection between this story she's telling is going to be to her own life, and when you figure it out, it's very exciting. Honestly, this list is so long, I'm going to start skipping some of these. Oh hey, it's me from tomorrow. So I literally could not get this video down below half an hour because I talked for such a long time, so I have decided to cut it here. This is going to be the end of part 1, and I will post part 2 in a couple of weeks, okay? So comment below if you want the rest of part 2, or if you're like, you know what, Emma, that's enough, because I just keep talking and talking. But for now, this is all you're getting. Give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button below, you know the drill, and I will see you soon.